Why even wear the uniform? You should be sitting at a desk, filing paperwork with the other weaklings. The words cut across Fort Bragg's training yard like a blade, sharp and deliberate. Corporal Jake Raines stood with his arms crossed, biceps flexed under his PT shirt, a smirk pulling at his mouth as 40 soldiers turned to watch. The morning sun was barely up, 6:15 a.m., and the heat was already building on the packed dirt. 6 new recruits stood in an awkward cluster near the pull-up bars, their fresh name tapes stark against faded uniforms. One of them, a man in his late 30s with the name Crawford stitched above his pocket, watched the scene with an intensity that didn't match the newness of his boots. Sarah Kendrick stood at attention in the center of the formation, her gray PT shirt damp with sweat that had nothing to do with exercise. In her right hand, she held a single sheet of paper, crisp and official, with the medical office stamp visible even from a distance. Her face was calm, almost blank, but her chest rose and fell in a rhythm anyone trained in tactical breathing would recognize. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out. The kind of breathing that keeps your heart rate steady when adrenaline wants to spike. Sergeant Reynolds stepped forward, plucking the paper from her hand with 2 fingers like it was contaminated. He held it up to the light, making a show of reading it aloud. Medical waiver, spinal sensitivity due to prior injury, upper body restrictions, modified duty recommended for 6 to 12 months. He lowered the paper and looked at Sarah, his expression somewhere between pity and disgust. You know what we call this in my day, Kendrick? Sarah didn't answer. Her eyes stayed forward, locked on a point somewhere past Reynolds' shoulder. An excuse, Reynolds finished. He turned to the formation, waving the paper like a flag. This is what happens when standards drop, when we start making accommodations for people who can't handle the job. Laughter rippled through the ranks. Not everyone joined in. Private First Class Martinez, standing in the back row, kept his face neutral. Sergeant Major Tom Brooks, a retired contractor who had been hired to observe training protocols, stood 30 feet away near the equipment shed, clipboard in hand. His weathered face showed nothing, but his eyes moved from Sarah to the cluster of new recruits, then back. He didn't write anything down, not yet. Sarah's gaze shifted for less than 2 seconds. A quick scan across the formation. Most soldiers looked amused or bored. A few seemed uncomfortable, but when her eyes landed on Crawford, something flickered. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't smiling. His jaw was tight, and his right hand had moved slightly toward the cargo pocket of his pants. The movement instinctive and wrong for someone who should be focused on morning formation. She filed it away and returned her attention to Reynolds, who was still talking. You want modified duty? Fine. You can stand over there and watch while the rest of us maintain the standard. He thrust the paper back at her, but don't expect anyone to respect you for it. Corporal Raines stepped closer, invading her personal space. He was tall, 6'3" at least, and he used every inch. Seriously, why are you even here? If you can't do PT, you're useless. Go sit at a desk and let the real soldiers do real work. Sarah took the paper, folded it once, and tucked it into her waistband. Her voice when she spoke was quiet as almost flat. Copy that, Corporal. The lack of emotion seemed to irritate him more. Raines turned to the others, throwing his hands up. See? No fight, no backbone. Just copy that. He mimicked her tone, pitching his voice higher. More laughter followed. Brooks made a note on his clipboard now, but his eyes stayed on Crawford, who had shifted his weight and pulled his hand back to his side, too deliberately casual. Reynolds clapped once, the sound sharp. All right, enough entertainment, standard PT routine. Kendrick, you're dismissed. Go, I don't know, stretch or something. Don't hurt yourself. He waved her off like she was a nuisance, and Sarah stepped out of formation without a word, moving to the side of the yard where a few scattered benches and equipment racks sat in the shade. The formation began their warm-up, Raines leading the count with exaggerated enthusiasm, throwing glances her way every few reps. Sarah lowered herself onto a bench, her movements careful, and began wrapping athletic tape around her right wrist with slow precision. The kind of precision that came from doing it hundreds of times, in darker places, where a loose wrap could mean a broken bone or worse. She winced as she adjusted her shoulder, a genuine flash of pain crossing her face. The injury was real. The scar tissue underneath her shirt was thick, raised, the kind that comes from metal fragments and emergency surgery. But pain had never stopped her before. It was a tool now, just like the modified duty waiver, just like the silence she wore like armor. From his position near the shed, Brooks watched her tape her wrist, then glanced down at his notes. The way she wrapped it, starting from the base of the thumb and spiraling down toward the pulse point, wasn't civilian. It wasn't even standard military. It was the kind of wrap you learned in close quarters combat training, where grip strength and wrist stability could be the difference between controlling a threat and becoming one. He looked back at Crawford, who was now stretching with the other recruits, but his eyes kept drifting towards Sarah. Not curious, not mocking, calculating. Brooks wrote 3 words on his clipboard: target present, operator holding. The morning routine ground forward: push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups. Rains made sure to call out her absence every few minutes, loud enough for everyone to hear. Nice to have standards, isn't it? Nice to know we're not carrying dead weight. The jabs came easy, casual, woven into the cadence of the workout. Some soldiers ignored it, others grinned. A few looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Sarah stayed on the bench, watching. Her face betrayed nothing, but her eyes tracked movements with the kind of awareness that doesn't come from basic training. She noted who laughed the loudest. Rains, obviously. Private Travis Keller, a younger soldier who seemed eager to fit in. Specialist Kyle Barrett from the medical admin office, who'd signed off on her waiver review and now looked smug. And Staff Sergeant Derek Walsh, who stood near the front with his arms crossed. Not participating in the mockery, but not stopping it either. Walsh was older, 40 maybe, with the kind of weathered face that came from 2 decades of service. He hadn't said much, but the way he stared at her felt different, heavier. When the formation broke for water, Rains strutted over to where she sat, grinning. "You good over here, Kendrick? Need me to get you a pillow? Maybe some hot cocoa?" Sarah looked up at him, her expression unchanged. "I'm fine, Corporal." "Yeah, you look fine." He leaned against the bench, close enough that she could smell his sweat. "You know what I think? I think you're playing the system, faking an injury so you don't have to do the hard work. I've seen it before. People like you always find a way to skate by." She didn't respond, just held his gaze, steady and calm, until he got bored and walked away, muttering something about waste of space. Martinez approached a moment later, holding a water bottle. He set it down next to her without a word, then moved off before anyone could comment. Sarah picked it up, took a slow sip, and let her gaze drift back to Crawford. He was talking to another recruit now, his posture relaxed, but his hand had moved to his pocket again, fingers brushing against the outline of a phone. Brooks saw it too. He shifted position slightly, angling himself so he had a clear line of sight, and made another note. The morning stretched into its 2nd hour. The sun climbed higher, turning the dirt to dust under boots, and the mockery settled into a routine hum of disdain. It wasn't loud anymore. It didn't need to be. The damage was done in glances, in the way soldiers stepped around her like she was invisible, in the whispered jokes that carried just far enough. Sarah endured it the way she'd endured worse, in silence, with patience, and with a clarity of purpose that no one in that yard could see. Because she wasn't the victim here, she was the operation. And every insult, every dismissal, every ounce of contempt they threw at her was pulling them closer to the trap she'd set, closer to exposing the rot underneath, closer to the moment when the weak, broken soldier they saw would disappear, and something much more dangerous would be revealed. But not yet. Not until they were all watching. Not until the right person made the wrong move. For now, she wrapped her wrist, controlled her breathing, and waited. What would you do if 40 people mocked your pain? Hit, like if you'd stay silent, or comment if you'd fight back. And if you want to see how patience becomes power, hit that subscribe button. This story is just beginning. The days that followed played out like a slow bleed, each one adding another layer of humiliation that Sarah absorbed without flinching. The mockery didn't fade. It evolved. What started as public insults in the training yard spread like a virus through the digital veins of the unit. By day 2, a photo of her medical waiver appeared in the battalion group chat. Someone had taken a picture during formation, the document clear enough to read, and captioned it with a single word: excuses. The reactions came fast, laughing emojis, comments like, "new level of soft," and "remember when soldiers were tough." Private Keller, the youngest of the group, shared it to his personal account with the hashtag military standards, and within hours it had been screenshotted and passed around to other units on base. Sarah saw it. She was added to the group chat after all. Everyone was. She read the comments in silence, sitting alone in the barracks common area, with her phone tilted just enough that no one could see the screen over her shoulder. Her face stayed neutral, but her thumb moved, scrolling slowly, cataloging every name that reacted, every person who piled on. She took a screenshot of the participant list and saved it to a folder marked Training Notes. Then she set the phone down and went back to reading a field manual on shoulder rehabilitation, her expression as calm as still water. Brooks saw her later that evening near the PX, walking with the careful posture of someone managing chronic pain. He didn't approach, just watched from across the parking lot as she loaded a bag of groceries into her car, her movements efficient despite the visible stiffness in her right shoulder. When she drove away, he pulled out his own phone and typed a short message. Subject maintaining cover, network expanding as predicted. He sent it to a number with no name attached and deleted the conversation thread immediately after. On day 3, the professional pressure began. Staff Sergeant Walsh called Sarah into his office, a cramped space in the admin building that smelled like stale coffee and old paper. He sat behind a desk cluttered with files and leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. "Sit down, Kendrick." She sat, spine straight, hands on her knees. Walsh picked up a folder, flipped it open, and studied the contents like he was seeing them for the first time. "Your medical waiver. I've been reviewing it." "Yes, Staff Sergeant. There are some inconsistencies." He looked up, his eyes sharp. "The injury date listed here doesn't match the timeline in your service record, and the recommending physician isn't part of our network. Off-base provider." Sarah kept her voice even. "The injury occurred during leave, Staff Sergeant. I sought treatment at a civilian facility before returning to duty." "Convenient." He closed the folder and set it down, tapping it twice with his index finger. "I'm requesting a secondary medical review. We need to verify this is legitimate. Too many people abuse the system, and frankly, your performance since filing this waiver has raised questions." "I'm complying with all restrictions as outlined, Staff Sergeant. That's not what I'm hearing." He leaned forward, his tone shifting from bureaucratic to personal. "I'm hearing you can't keep up, that you're a liability. And if this waiver turns out to be exaggerated or falsified, there will be consequences. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Staff Sergeant." "Staff." He dismissed her with a wave, and Sarah left the office, walking down the narrow hallway with the same measured pace. But inside, a clock had started ticking. Walsh wasn't just skeptical, he was invested. And that made him either very thorough or very guilty. She'd find out which soon enough. Specialist Kyle Barrett from the medical admin office was the one who conducted the records review. He was young, mid-20s, with the kind of eager efficiency that came from wanting to prove himself. When Sarah arrived for her appointment, he greeted her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and gestured to a chair in the small exam room. "This should be quick," he said, pulling up her file on the computer. "Just need to verify some details, confirm the injury history, make sure everything aligns." Sarah nodded and waited. Barrett clicked through screens, his brow furrowing slightly. "Okay, so the initial injury report says lumbar strain with nerve involvement, but the follow-up notes mention rotator cuff damage. Those are 2 different areas." "The initial diagnosis was incomplete," Sarah said. "Further imaging revealed additional damage to the shoulder. The lumbar issue was secondary." "Right, but that's not reflected in the original documentation, and the imaging you're referencing, it's not in our system. It was done off base, civilian radiology." Barrett leaned back, tapping his pen against the desk. "See, that's the problem. I can't verify any of this without the actual scans. And without verification, I'm required to flag this waiver as potentially invalid." Sarah met his gaze, her voice calm. "I can request the records be transferred. That would take weeks. In the meantime, your modified duty status is under review." He closed the file and stood, his smile returning. "I'm sure it'll all work out. Just need to follow protocol." As she left the office, Sarah caught sight of Barrett's screen reflected in the glass partition. He'd opened her file again and was scrolling through sections marked redacted in bold red letters. His face had gone pale. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then minimized the window and picked up his phone. By day 5, the whispers had turned into open speculation. In the DFAC during lunch, Sarah sat alone at a corner table, eating her meal in silence while nearby soldiers debated her situation like it was a sports game. "I'm telling you, she's faking it," Raines said, loud enough to carry. "I've seen her move. She's not that hurt." "Then why file the waiver?" someone else asked. "Because she's smart enough to play the system. Get modified duty, avoid the hard work, still collect a paycheck." Keller chimed in, grinning. "I heard Walsh is pushing for a discharge, medical separation. Get her out before she drags down the whole unit." Martinez, sitting at the far end of their table, set down his fork. You don't know what you're talking about. Rains turned, eyebrows raised. Oh, you defending her now, Martinez? She your girlfriend or something? I'm saying you don't know her story. I know enough. Rains leaned back, smirking. She can't do PT. She can't deploy. What good is she? Martinez didn't respond, just picked up his tray and left. As he passed Sarah's table, he gave her a slight nod. She returned it, barely perceptible, and went back to her meal. From across the room, Crawford watched the exchange. He'd been sitting with the other new recruits, quiet and observant, blending in the way someone does when they're trying very hard not to stand out. But his eyes followed Martinez, then shifted to Sarah, and his jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone under the table, typed something quickly, and slipped it back into his pocket. Brooks, standing in line for coffee, saw the movement. He didn't react, just paid for his drink and walked out, making a call the moment he was outside. Movement confirmed, target is active, recommend accelerate timeline. On the other end, a voice responded, calm and clipped. Negative, let it play out. We need to see the full network. Brooks ended the call and stared across the base, his expression grim. The trap was working, but traps had a way of snapping shut on everyone nearby, not just the target. He just hoped Sarah knew what she was doing. Day 7 arrived with the weight of inevitability. The morning formation was larger than usual. Colonel David Hayes had announced an inspection the day before, one of those surprise visits that put everyone on edge, and the training yard was packed with soldiers standing at rigid attention, boots polished, uniforms pressed. Sarah stood in her usual spot, near the back, her PT uniform clean but noticeably different. No modified duty waiver in hand this time, no visible markers of weakness. Just her, standing tall despite the tightness in her shoulder, breathing steady. Reynolds called the formation to attention, and Colonel Hayes stepped forward, flanked by 2 aides. He was in his early 50s, with silver hair cut high and tight, and the kind of presence that made even senior NCOs straighten their spines. His gaze swept across the ranks, pausing here and there, taking in details most officers would miss. When his eyes landed on Sarah, they lingered, just for a moment, then he moved on. Reynolds stepped forward, saluting. All present and accounted for, sir. Hayes returned the salute, then addressed the formation. I'm here to observe training standards. Make sure we're maintaining the excellence this unit is known for. His voice carried easily across the yard. I've heard concerns, questions about whether we're holding the line or letting it slip. Today, I'm going to see for myself. He turned to Reynolds. Let's start with PT demonstration. I want to see form, discipline, execution. Reynolds nodded and began calling out exercises. The formation moved through the routine with practiced efficiency. Push-ups, sit-ups, mountain climbers. Hayes watched, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Halfway through, he raised a hand. Hold. Everyone froze. Hayes pointed at Sarah. Kendrick, front and center. The yard went silent. Every eye turned toward her as she stepped out of formation and marched to the front, stopping 3 paces from the colonel and saluting. At ease. Hayes studied her for a moment. You're on modified duty? Yes, sir. Because of an injury? Yes, sir. He tilted his head slightly. But you are here, in formation, not sitting on the sidelines. I can observe and learn, sir. Hayes nodded slowly, then turned to the group of new recruits standing nearby. You 6, come here. Crawford and the others moved forward, their movements hesitant. Hayes gestured to them, then back to Sarah. Kendrick, you've been in long enough to know proper form. Since you can't participate fully, I want you to demonstrate technique for these recruits. Show them how it's done. Use your words if you can't use your body. It wasn't a request. It was an order wrapped in a test, and Sarah knew it. She could feel Walsh's eyes on her from the side, Raines's smirk, the weight of 40 soldiers waiting to see if she'd falter. Yes, sir. Hayes stepped back, giving her space. Proceed. Sarah turned to the recruits, her voice calm and clear. Push-up position. Let me see your form. They dropped down, some better than others. One recruit, a kid who looked barely 20, had his hips sagging, his hands too wide. Sarah knelt beside him, her movements careful but precise. Wrists under shoulders, she said, adjusting his hand placement with a light touch. Core engaged. Your body should be a straight line from head to heels. The recruit corrected his position, and Sarah moved to the next one, Crawford. He was already in near-perfect form, but she paused anyway, studying him. Breathing, she said, 4 count in through the nose, 4 count hold, 4 count out. Keeps your heart rate steady under stress. Crawford's eyes flicked up to meet hers, and for a split second, something passed between them. Recognition, awareness. Then he looked down and adjusted his breathing. Sarah stood, addressing the group. The push-up isn't about speed, it's about control. If you can't control your body, you can't control the situation. She demonstrated a single push-up, lowering herself with deliberate slowness despite the visible stiffness in her shoulder. Her form was flawless. No sag, no shake, just controlled descent and rise. When she came back up, she caught Brooks watching from near the equipment shed. He gave the slightest nod, then looked away. Hayes stepped forward. Good. Now, show them a plank hold. Sarah's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed even. Yes, sir. She moved into plank position, forearms on the ground, body locked in a straight line. The recruits mirrored her. Seconds ticked by. 10, 20, 30. Her shoulder began to burn, the old injury flaring, but her form didn't waver. At 45 seconds, Hayes spoke again. Kendrick, switch to one arm. The yard went still. It wasn't a standard request. It was a stress test, and everyone knew it. Walsh's voice cut through the silence. Sir, with respect, her medical waiver specifies... I'm aware of the waiver, Staff Sergeant. Hayes didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on Sarah. Kendrick, can you do it? She could refuse, cite the waiver, walk away. But that wasn't the play. Not here, not now. Yes, sir. She shifted her weight, lifting her left arm and tucking it behind her back. Her right forearm took the full load, and the pain spiked immediately, white-hot and sharp. Her breathing hitched for half a second, and she forced it back into rhythm. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out. Raines leaned toward Keller and muttered, watch her fold. 10 seconds. 20. Her shoulder screamed. Sweat dripped from her forehead onto the dirt. The recruits beside her were shaking, some already collapsing, but Sarah held. 30 seconds. Walsh stepped closer to Hayes. Sir, this doesn't prove anything. She could be exacerbating an injury, and if... 40 seconds, Hayes said, cutting him off. Sarah's vision narrowed, the edges going fuzzy, but her body stayed locked. 50 seconds, 60. At 70 seconds, she smoothly lowered her left arm back down, shifted her weight, and returned to a standard plank. Then, without waiting for permission, she pushed up into a kneeling position and stood, her face flushed but composed. Hayes watched her for a long moment. Then he turned to the formation. That's discipline. That's control. Carry on. He walked away, his aides following, leaving Sarah standing in the center of the yard, with every eye on her. Walsh's face had gone red. He stepped forward, voice tight. Kendrick, my office, now. She followed him across the yard, past the stairs and whispers, into the admin building. Walsh slammed the door behind them and rounded on her. What the hell was that? Following orders, Staff Sergeant. You just proved you don't need that waiver. You just made yourself a liar. I proved I can endure pain. That's not the same as being uninjured. Walsh jabbed a finger toward her. I'm writing a report, refusing to follow protocol, misrepresenting your medical status. You're done, Kendrick. Sarah said nothing, just stood at attention, her breathing still steady despite the fire in her shoulder. Walsh grabbed a notepad and started scribbling, his handwriting harsh and angular. You think you're clever, playing games, but I see through it. From outside, through the thin office walls, came the muffled sound of the formation resuming drills. And somewhere in that yard, Crawford pulled out his phone, typed a short message, and hit send. The message read, "She's stronger than the file says. Possible compromise." The response came 30 seconds later. Eliminate risk. Phase 1, abort if necessary. Crawford deleted both messages, pocketed the phone, and rejoined the formation, his face a mask of calm. Who do you think he's texting? Drop your theory in the comments, and smash that like button if you think she's hiding something big. The reveal is coming, and it's not what you expect. Inside Walsh's office, Sarah stood silent while the staff sergeant filled page after page with his report, each word another nail he thought he was driving into her career. But outside, in the hot Carolina sun, the trap was tightening, the network was lighting up, and every person who pushed her, every insult thrown, every attempt to break her down was painting a target on their own back. She just had to hold a little longer, just until the right moment, just until they were all watching when the truth came out. And then the quiet, broken soldier they thought they knew would vanish. and something far more dangerous would take her place. Walsh finished his report with a flourish, signed it, and slapped the folder shut. "You're dismissed, and don't be surprised when this lands on the colonel's desk by end of day." Sarah saluted, about-faced, and left the office. The hallway was empty, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and she walked its length with the same measured pace she'd maintained all week. No faster, no slower. When she pushed through the door into the bright morning sun, she paused for just a moment, letting her eyes adjust, and rolled her right shoulder in a small circle. The pain was still there, a dull throb that would get worse before it got better. But pain was information. It told her the injury was real, that the cover was holding, and that every person who doubted her was exactly where she needed them to be. The training yard had emptied during her time in Walsh's office. Most soldiers had moved on to their duty stations, leaving only a skeleton crew setting up equipment for afternoon drills. The new recruits, however, were still there, clustered near the pull-up bars under the supervision of a junior NCO who looked barely older than they were. Crawford stood among them, his posture relaxed but his eyes scanning, always scanning. Sarah started toward the barracks, but a voice stopped her. "Kendrick?" She turned. Colonel Hayes stood 20 feet away, hands clasped behind his back. "Alone." "Sir?" She came to attention. He walked closer, stopping just outside the regulation distance for personal space. His voice was low, meant only for her. That was quite a demonstration. "Just following orders, sir?" "Yes, you were." He studied her face, his expression unreadable. "How's the shoulder?" "Manageable, sir." "Good." He glanced past her toward the recruits, then back. "I need you to do something for me. Those new recruits are struggling with basic form. The NCO supervising them is competent, but he doesn't have your attention to detail. I want you to spend the next hour working with them. Hands-on instruction. Make sure they don't develop bad habits early." Sarah's pulse didn't change, but her mind accelerated. This wasn't random. Hayes didn't micromanage training schedules. This was deliberate. "Yes, sir." "And Kendrick?" He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping even lower. "Pay attention to everything, not just their form." "Understood, sir?" He walked away without another word, and Sarah turned toward the recruits. The junior NCO saw her coming and visibly relaxed, clearly happy to hand off the responsibility. "They're all yours. Good luck." She nodded and approached the group. 6 faces turned toward her, varying degrees of wariness and curiosity. Crawford's expression was the most neutral, but his shoulders had tensed. "All right," Sarah said, her voice carrying without being loud. "We're going to focus on fundamentals. Push-ups first. I want to see what you're working with. Down." They dropped into position. 2 of them had decent form. 3 were struggling. Crawford was perfect. Too perfect. His elbows tracked exactly parallel to his body, his descent controlled to the inch, his breathing timed with precision. It was the kind of form that came from years of practice, not weeks of basic. Sarah walked among them, correcting hand placement, adjusting hip angles. When she reached the youngest recruit, a kid with the name Parker stitched above his picket, she knelt beside him. His wrists were too far forward, his core sagging. "Reset," she said. "Hands directly under your shoulders. Feel the connection between your hands and your spine. Your body is one piece, not separate parts." Parker tried to adjust but wobbled, his arms shaking. He reached out instinctively, grabbing the sleeve of Sarah's PT shirt to steady himself, and pulled. The fabric slid up her right arm. For a moment, nothing happened. Parker let go, mumbling an apology, and Sarah's arm hung suspended in the air, sleeve bunched near her shoulder. The training yard was quiet except for the distant sound of boots on pavement and the low hum of a generator near the equipment shed. Then Crawford saw it. The mark ran from just below her shoulder joint down to her elbow, a series of thin, dark lines that looked like scars but weren't. They were too precise, too deliberate, the kind of marks made by medical lasers in controlled environments. The lines formed a pattern, geometric and unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were looking at. A triangle nested inside a hexagon, with a serial code running along the outer edge in numbers so small they were almost invisible. Near the center, the bizarre, where the lines intersected, the tissue was slightly raised, the result of a procedure that embedded identification beneath the skin in a way that couldn't be forged, couldn't be removed without leaving massive scarring, and couldn't be faked. It was a shadow mark, the kind given to operators who worked in places that didn't officially exist, doing things that were never written down. Crawford's face went white. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His right hand moved toward his pocket, the motion automatic, and his eyes darted toward the perimeter of the yard like he was calculating distance to the nearest exit. Colonel Hayes had been walking back toward the admin building. He glanced over his shoulder, a routine check, and his gaze landed on Sarah's exposed arm. He stopped mid-stride, his face drained of color, not from shock, but from recognition, the kind of recognition that comes with classified briefings and names that don't appear on rosters. His hand, which had been reaching for the door, dropped to his side and hung there, frozen. Near the equipment shed, Sergeant Major Brooks had been inspecting a stack of crates. He looked up at the wrong moment, or maybe the right one, and his eyes locked onto the mark. He didn't move, didn't react visibly, but his hand shifted to the radio clipped to his belt, and his thumb pressed the call button twice in rapid succession. No words, just the signal. In the yard, the other recruits were still focused on their push-ups, oblivious. But two soldiers near the pull-up bars, men who had been adjusting equipment and ignoring the training session, both turned at the same time. Their movements were synchronized in a way that didn't happen by accident. They were watching Crawford now, not Sarah, and their positions had shifted to cut off angles toward the gate. Crawford saw them. His breathing quickened, just slightly, and his jaw clenched. His hand was in his pocket now, fingers wrapped around his phone. Sarah slowly pulled her sleeve back down, her movements unhurried, and adjusted Parker's position with her other hand. Better, hold that. She stood, and the world seemed to resume its normal speed. But the air had changed. The temperature hadn't dropped, but it felt colder, heavier. Colonel Hayes turned fully around now, his face hardening into a mask of command. He didn't walk toward her. He didn't need to. He raised his hand to his own radio and pressed the button once. His voice was calm, almost casual. All units, stand down from current activity. Clear the yard, training suspended. The two soldiers near the pull-up bars moved immediately, not toward the gate, but flanking Crawford's position from a distance. Brooks was already in motion, crossing the yard with the deliberate pace of someone who knew exactly what he was doing and didn't need to rush. Two more men appeared from the admin building, dressed in civilian contractor gear, but moving with military precision. MPs, they had to be. Crawford's hand was out of his pocket now, phone clutched tight. His thumb moved across the screen, typing something, but before he could hit send, Brooks was beside him, not touching him, but close enough. "Gonna need you to hand over the phone, son." Crawford's eyes flicked from Brooks to the MPs closing in, then to Sarah, who stood 10 feet away, her face as calm as it had been all morning. "I don't understand. I wasn't doing anything." "The phone." Brooks's voice didn't rise, but the command was absolute. Crawford's fingers tightened around the device for a moment, then relaxed. He held it out, and Brooks took it, passing it immediately to one of the MPs, who produced an evidence bag from somewhere and sealed it. Colonel Hayes reached the group, his presence cutting through the confusion like a blade. The other recruits had scrambled to their feet, backing away from Crawford like he'd suddenly become contagious. Hayes looked at Brooks, then at Sarah, then at Crawford. "Escort him to the MP station. No one talks to him until I get there." "Yes, sir." Brooks gestured, and the two MPs moved in, one on each side of Crawford. They didn't cuff him, didn't touch him, just stood close enough that any attempt to run would be immediately stopped. Crawford found his voice, shaky and higher than before. "Sir, I don't know what's happening. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just a recruit. Save it." Hayes cut him off, his tone cold. "Move." They walked him away, past the stunned faces of his fellow recruits, past the soldiers who had stopped their work to watch, across the yard toward a building Sarah had never needed to enter. The rest of the recruits stood frozen, looking at each other, at Sarah, at the colonel, trying to piece together what had just happened. Hayes turned to them, his voice returning to something resembling normal command authority. "You're dismissed. Return to barracks. Do not discuss what you just saw. That's an order." They scattered like leaves, and within 30 seconds, the yard was empty except for Hayes, Brooks, Sarah, and the two remaining contractors who'd taken up positions near the gate. Hayes looked at Sarah, really looked at her, not as a colonel evaluating a soldier, but as someone seeing her for the first time. "We need to talk. My office, now." "Yes, sir." Brooks fell in beside them as they walked, and Sarah caught the slightest hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Well," he said quietly, "that went faster than expected." Hayes didn't respond, but his pace quickened. The walk to the colonel's office felt longer than it was. Sarah's shoulder throbbed with every step, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving the pain raw and present. She kept her face neutral, her breathing steady, but inside, Every nerve was alight. This was the moment, the fulcrum. Everything before had been set up, and everything after would be consequence. Hayes's office was larger than Walsh's, with actual furniture instead of a desk and a folding chair. A heavy wooden desk dominated one side, flanked by filing cabinets and a bookshelf filled with manuals and framed commendations. A window looked out over the base, blinds half drawn against the midday sun. Hayes gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Sit." Sarah sat. Brooks closed the door behind them and took up a position leaning against the wall, arms crossed. Hayes settled into his own chair, pulled out a drawer, and withdrew a folder. He set it on the desk between them and opened it. The first page was a photograph. Sarah, younger, in tactical gear with her face partially obscured by a helmet and goggles, standing in front of a helicopter in a desert that could have been any desert. The photo had a red stamp across the top. Top secret special access required. 3 months ago, Hayes began, we received intelligence that someone in this unit was leaking classified information. Not just routine reports, personnel rosters for operators, movement schedules, locations of assets in active theaters, the kind of information that gets people killed. He flipped to the next page. A list of names, some redacted, others highlighted. Counterintelligence identified a pattern. The leaks coincided with administrative access to certain files, medical records, training schedules, deployment paperwork. The leak was coming from someone with broad access, someone trusted, and someone smart enough to cover their tracks. Brooks spoke from his position against the wall. We needed bait, someone with a profile unusual enough to draw attention, but believable enough that the network wouldn't suspect a trap. Hayes tapped the folder. That's where you came in. Sarah said nothing, just watched. Hayes leaned back, his expression softening slightly. Your injury is real. The medical waiver is legitimate, but you volunteered to turn it into an operation. Come to this base under modified duty, present yourself as vulnerable, and wait to see who took the bait. Brooks pushed off the wall and walked to the window, looking out. The modified duty profile was perfect. It created bureaucratic access points, medical reviews, administrative requests, clearance verifications. Every person who interacted with your file left a trail, and every person who shared information about you outside, authorized channels lit themselves up. Hayes pulled out another page, a log, rows of timestamps and user IDs. Staff Sergeant Walsh accessed your file 11 times in 3 weeks. 6 of those accesses were outside his duty hours. 3 were from an unsecured terminal, and 2 days ago he forwarded a copy of your medical waiver to an external email address routed through an encrypted server. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept silent. Specialist Barrett falsified a medical review request, Hayes continued. He flagged your file as potentially fraudulent, which triggered additional scrutiny and gave him a reason to dig deeper. He was looking for something specific. He didn't find it because most of your record is redacted, but the attempt was enough. Brooks turned from the window. And then there's Crawford. David Crawford, age 38, supposedly a new recruit. Except his age alone should have raised flags. He's not prior service, no delayed entry program, just a guy who showed up 3 weeks ago with a suspiciously clean background check and a skill set way above basic level. Hayes closed the folder. Crawford is a courier, low level but connected. We've been tracking his communications for 2 weeks, and until today, he's been careful. No overt contact, no slip-ups. But the moment he saw your mark, he panicked. He tried to send a message. We intercepted it. He slid a printed screenshot across the desk. The message read, "She's stronger than the file says. Possible compromise." And the response, "Eliminate risk." Phase 1, abort if necessary. Sarah picked up the paper, read it twice, and set it back down. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, controlled. How many others? At least 2 more on base, Brooks said. We don't have IDs yet, but the phone data shows Crawford communicated with multiple numbers. One of them is Walsh's personal cell, the other is off base, and we're still running it down. Hayes folded his hands on the desk. Crawford's being processed now. His phone is being cracked by our cyber team, but it's encrypted, military grade, which tells us this network has access to resources. Walsh and Barrett are being brought in for questioning, and you... He paused, his expression somewhere between respect and concern. You just became the most visible target on this base. Sarah met his eyes. That was always the risk, sir. It was, but now we need to move fast. If this network realizes Crawford's been taken, They'll burn everything, delete files, destroy evidence, disappear. We have a window, maybe 45 minutes, before they figure out something's wrong and shut down. Brooks stepped closer. The phone is the key. If we crack it, we get the full network. Names, contacts, chain of command. But if we don't do it fast, they'll trigger a remote wipe, and we lose everything. Hayes stood. I'm pulling Barrett in right now. He's got technical skills and he's motivated. He'll help us crack that phone whether he wants to or not. Sarah rose as well, her hand instinctively going to her shoulder, pressing against the ache. What do you need from me, sir? I need you to stay close. If this goes sideways, if someone else in the network makes a move, you're the only one who can identify the signs. You've been watching them for weeks. You know their patterns. Yes, sir. Hayes opened the door and called for an aide, issuing rapid instructions. Within minutes, the office became a command center. A laptop was brought in, extra chairs, a secure phone line. Barrett arrived 10 minutes later, flanked by 2 MPs, his face pale and his hands shaking. Hayes didn't waste time. Sit down, specialist. Barrett sat, his eyes darting between the colonel and Sarah. Sir, I can explain. No explanations. You accessed files you weren't authorized for. You falsified medical review requests. And right now, I don't care why. I care about what you're going to do to fix it. He slid Crawford's phone, now in a clear evidence bag, across the desk. This phone is encrypted. I need you to crack it. You have 45 minutes. Barrett stared at the phone like it might explode. Sir, I can try, but you will do more than try. Hayes' voice dropped, cold and absolute. Because if you don't, you're going to face charges for aiding espionage. And if you think your career is over now, wait until you're sitting in Leavenworth, explaining to a military tribunal why American operators died because you helped leak their locations. Barrett's hands trembled, but he reached for the phone. I'll need a workstation, software, access to... Already being set up. Hayes gestured to the aide, who nodded and left. You'll have everything you need, and Kendrick will be there. Barrett's eyes widened. Sir? She's been trained in field intelligence. She knows what we're looking for. You crack the encryption. She guides the search. Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm. We're looking for contact lists, message threads, access logs, anything that maps the network. Barrett swallowed hard and nodded. They moved to a smaller room adjacent to the colonel's office, set up with a workstation and 2 monitors. Barrett took the seat, his fingers hovering over the keyboard like he wasn't sure where to start. Sarah stood behind him, close enough to see the screen, far enough not to crowd. Start with the basics, she said. Military service numbers as seed keys. If Crawford's background is fabricated, he might have used common default patterns. Barrett's fingers moved, typing commands. Lines of code scrolled across the screen. The encryption is layered. This isn't consumer grade. This is something else. Try rotation ciphers, 6-digit military timestamps. He tried, failed, tried again. 10 minutes passed. 20. Sweat beaded on his forehead. I'm not getting anywhere. The algorithm is adaptive. Every failed attempt locks it down tighter. Sarah leaned in, her eyes scanning the screen. She saw the pattern before Barrett did, the way the code responded to certain inputs. There, she pointed. That sequence. It's not random. It's a response to military phonetic alphabet inputs. Try Alpha Bravo Charlie as a string, Barrett typed. The screen flickered. A progress bar appeared, crawling forward. 30%, 50. It's working, he whispered. 75%, 90. The screen unlocked. A home screen appeared, clean and sparse. Barrett exhaled hard. We're in. Pull the messages first, Sarah said. Sort by frequency and recent activity. Barrett navigated through the phone, his hands steadier now. Message threads appeared, numbers without names, coded language. But buried in the noise were 3 threads that stood out. One matched Walsh's number, another was local, on base. The third was off base, encrypted but traceable. Sarah pointed to the third. That one, open it. The conversation was short, professional, and damning. Instructions on access schedules, requests for updates on the asset, and 3 days ago a message that made Sarah's blood run cold. Confirm identity of new personnel. Possible operator in modified duty. Require immediate verification. The response? Verification in progress. Subject matches profile, recommend surveillance escalation. Barrett stared at the screen. They knew you were here. Not at first, Sarah said, but they suspected. And Walsh confirmed it when he kept digging into my file. She scrolled further. More messages, more names. And then, at the bottom of the thread, a single message from 2 hours ago. Tower 4 confirms. Eliminate operator before she IDs cell. Barrett turned to look at her, his face ashen. Tower 4? That's the network. Sarah's voice was flat. Not ours. Hostile. They've been running assets inside military installations for at least a year. Crawford was one of them. The door opened and Hayes stepped in, Brooks behind him. Talk to me. We have the network, Sarah said. 7 names. 3 on base, 4 off. Walsh is confirmed. The other 2 on base are still unknown, but their numbers are logged. And the off-base contact, she pointed to the screen, that's the handler, codename Bishop. Hayes leaned over the desk, his face hard. Get me those names, now. Barrett worked furiously, cross-referencing phone numbers with base personnel databases. 2 more names appeared, Private Travis Keller and Corporal Jake Rains. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Rains, the loud one, the bully. He hadn't just been an opportunist, he'd been part of it. Hayes straightened. Detain them both, quietly. I want them in separate rooms before they know what's happening. Brooks pulled out his radio and issued the orders. Within minutes, reports came back. Keller located in the motor pool, Rains in the gym, both taken into custody without incident. Hayes turned to Sarah. You called it. Every single one. She shook her head slightly. They called themselves, sir. I just stood still long enough for them to show their hand. Hayes studied her for a long moment, then nodded. You wore their contempt like armor. Yes, sir. The room went quiet except for the hum of the workstation. Hayes pulled out a chair and sat, the weight of the last hour settling on his shoulders. All right, now we need to understand why. Brooks spoke from the doorway. Walsh was recruited 8 months ago. Financial pressure, gambling debts. Someone approached him, offered him a way out, and he took it. Barrett was coerced. They had something on him, family trouble, and used it as leverage. Rains and Keller, he shrugged. Useful idiots. Probably didn't even know what they were part of. Just thought they were being patriotic, reporting suspicious behavior. And Crawford? Hayes asked. Professional, trained, probably former military himself, but not ours. He's not talking yet, but he will. Hayes rubbed his face, exhaustion creeping in. Bishop is still out there, and if he knows we've taken down his network, he'll vanish. Sarah stepped forward. Then we don't let him know, not yet. We feed him information, make him think Crawford's still operational, buy ourselves time to trace him. Brooks raised an eyebrow. That's risky. It's the only play, Sarah said. Bishop is the target. The rest of this, the network, Crawford, Walsh, it's all secondary. If we don't get Bishop, he just rebuilds. Hayes considered, then nodded slowly. All right, we'll run it, but carefully. Brooks, coordinate with counterintelligence. Set up a misinformation feed. Make Bishop think his courier is still active. Yes, sir. Hayes stood and turned to Sarah. And you need medical attention. Real attention. That shoulder is worse than you're letting on. I'm fine, sir. That's an order, Kendrick. You've done your part. Let us handle the rest. She wanted to argue, but the look on his face left no room. Yes, sir. If this story gave you chills, smash that share button. Your friends need to see what happens when you underestimate the quiet ones. And subscribe, because Phase 2 is coming, and Bishop won't go quietly. The next 48 hours unfolded in controlled chaos. Crawford's interrogation yielded fragments, pieces of a puzzle that counterintelligence assembled with painstaking care. He wasn't just a courier, he was a cleaner, sent to identify and eliminate threats to the network. Sarah had been flagged 3 weeks into her assignment when Walsh's initial inquiries raised questions. Crawford's job was simple: confirm her identity and, if necessary, remove her from the equation. He failed, and in failing he exposed the entire cell. Walsh broke first during questioning. Faced with evidence of 11 unauthorized file accesses and a forwarded email to an encrypted server, he crumbled. He admitted to being recruited by an unknown contact who promised to clear his gambling debts in exchange for low-level intelligence. Personnel movements, duty schedules, medical records, nothing that seemed critical at the time, but when combined with other pieces from other sources, it became a map that hostile actors used to track high-value targets. Barrett's confession was quieter, tinged with shame. His sister had been in legal trouble, and someone had offered to make it disappear in exchange for small favors, flagging files, creating administrative bottlenecks. He never thought anyone would get hurt. Rains and Keller were different. They weren't recruited, they were manipulated. Someone, likely Crawford, had fed them a story about rooting out insider threats and keeping an eye on suspicious personnel. They thought they were helping. They thought Sarah, with her medical waiver and evasive behavior, was hiding something wrong. They never knew they were tools in a larger game. Within a week, all four were formally charged. Walsh faced court-martial for espionage and unauthorized disclosure of classified information. Barrett received a lesser charge due to cooperation, but his career was over. Rains and Keller were reprimanded, demoted, and reassigned. Their intentions didn't erase the damage. The institutional response was swift. New protocols were implemented for accessing personnel files, particularly those with special clearances. Medical records for anyone with top-secret special compartmented information now required two-person integrity and audit trails. A confidential reporting channel was established for personnel to report suspicious activity without fear of retaliation. And training modules on operational security and insider threat awareness became mandatory across the base. Sarah sat through the debriefing session days with the same calm she'd maintained throughout the operation. She answered questions with precision, provided timelines, confirmed details. When counterintelligence asked if she'd ever felt at risk, she paused for a moment, then said, "Every day, but that was the job." Colonel Hayes submitted a formal commendation, classified and sealed, that would never appear on her public record, but would follow her through every clearance review and assignment for the rest of her career. He also submitted a recommendation for promotion to warrant officer, which was approved in a closed-door session with a 3-star general who flew in specifically to review the case. The promotion ceremony was private. 4 people attended: Hayes, Brooks, an administrative officer, and Sarah. No crowd, no applause. Just the quiet exchange of rank insignia and a handshake that carried more weight than any parade. Afterward, Hayes walked with her across the base, the evening air cooling as the sun dipped below the horizon. "Your shoulder," he said. "Medical is scheduling surgery for next month, full rotator cuff repair. You'll be on restricted duty for 6 months minimum." "I know, sir. And you'll actually follow the restrictions this time. No operations, no field work. You're going to heal properly." She almost smiled. "Yes, sir." They reached the barracks, and Hayes stopped. "For what it's worth, what you did, not many people could have endured that. The mockery, the isolation, knowing you could end it at any time but choosing not to, that takes a kind of strength most soldiers never have to find." Sarah looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Strength isn't noise, sir. It's discipline when no one is clapping." He nodded, and she could see the respect in his eyes. "Get some rest, warrant officer. You've earned it." She saluted, and he returned it, then walked away into the gathering dusk. 6 months later, Sergeant Major Brooks stood in front of a new group of recruits, his weathered face stern as he addressed them on their first day. "You're going to meet a lot of soldiers here. Some will be loud, some will be flashy, some will tell you how tough they are every chance they get." He paused, letting his words settle. "The strongest soldiers don't announce themselves. They don't need to. Watch the quiet ones. Learn from them, because when everything falls apart, they're the ones who will still be standing." A challenge coin sat on his desk, visible to anyone who walked into his office. Hexagon shape, simple inscription, silent shield. It wasn't standard issue. It was made for a unit of 1. Sarah returned to duty 8 months after the operation. Her shoulder healed, and her record annotated with clearances that opened doors most soldiers never knew existed. She received a new assignment, classified, and left Fort Bragg without ceremony. But the story of the quiet soldier who endured mockery to expose a spy network became legend in certain circles, told in hushed tones during late-night briefings and advanced training courses. The names were never used, the details stayed classified, but the lesson remained. And on a Tuesday morning, exactly 10 months after Crawford's arrest, Sarah sat at a desk in an undisclosed location, reviewing intelligence reports. A package arrived, unmarked, delivered by courier. Inside was a single challenge coin. She picked it up, turned it over. The insignia wasn't one she recognized. A chess piece, a bishop. On the back, engraved in small letters, "Checkmate requires patience." She set the coin on her desk, her expression unchanging, and opened her laptop. An encrypted message was waiting. No sender, just coordinates and a date 3 weeks out. Brooks's voice came from the doorway behind her. She hadn't heard him enter, but she wasn't surprised. He had a way of moving quietly when he wanted to. "That didn't take long," he said. She didn't turn around. "He knows I'm coming. He does, and he's not going to make it easy. I don't expect easy." She picked up the coin again, running her thumb over the bishop engraving. "I expect thorough." Brooks stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "This won't be like Crawford. Bishop is careful, methodical. He's been running networks for years without getting caught. He's connected, resourced, and now he's aware that someone took down his entire operation." "Good." Sarah set the coin down with deliberate care. "I've got 3 months to plan, and unlike him, I don't need a network. I just need patience." Brooks studied her for a moment, then allowed himself a rare smile. "He sent you the coin to intimidate you, to remind you that he's still out there, still a threat." "I know. And you're going to use it." "Of course." She finally turned to look at him, and there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not anger, not eagerness, just cold, calculated certainty. "Every piece of information is a weapon. He just handed me his signature. Now I know how he thinks, how he moves, and when the time comes, I'll know exactly where to find him." Brooks nodded slowly. "The Colonel approved your request. You'll have full operational authority, support assets on standby, and this time, you won't be playing defense." "No." She stood, wincing slightly, as her shoulder reminded her of its limits. "This time, I'm hunting." The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the ventilation system. Brooks moved to leave, then paused at the door. "You know he's going to be expecting you." "That's fine. Let him prepare, let him fortify, let him think he's ready." She picked up the coin one more time, held it up to the light, then slipped it into her pocket. "Because when I come for him, he'll realize that all his preparation was based on one mistake." "What's that?" "He thinks I'm coming for revenge. I'm not." Her voice was quiet, steady, and absolutely certain. "I'm coming for justice. And justice isn't loud. It's patient. And it doesn't stop until the job is done." Brooks left without another word, and Sarah turned back to her desk, pulling up files, maps, communication logs. The coordinates Bishop had sent were for a location in Eastern Europe, a city she'd never been to, but had studied extensively during her training. He was inviting her to his ground, his rules, his advantage, or so he thought. She opened a secure channel and typed a message to a contact whose name didn't appear anywhere in official records. "Tower 4 is compromised. Primary target identified. Requesting surveillance package and exfiltration contingency. Timeline, 3 weeks." The response came in less than a minute. "Approved. Package en route. Good hunting." Sarah closed the laptop and stood, walking to the window. The base outside was quiet, soldiers moving through their routines, unaware of the currents running beneath the surface. Unaware that in 3 weeks, one of them would step off a transport plane in a foreign country and begin a hunt that would either end a threat or confirm her place among the ghosts. She wasn't worried. She'd spent months being underestimated, mocked, dismissed. She'd turned weakness into a weapon and silence into a shield. And now, for the first time since the operation began, she wasn't hiding. She wasn't pretending. She was exactly who she'd always been, a soldier, an operator, a hunter who knew that the most dangerous enemy was the one you never heard coming. The challenge coin in her pocket felt heavier than it should, like it carried the weight of everything that was about to unfold. She pulled it out one last time, stared at the bishop engraving, and allowed herself a small, cold smile. "Checkmate," she whispered, "but not the way you think." She placed the coin on the windowsill, turned, and walked out of the room. Behind her, the coin caught the last rays of sunlight, glinting once before the door closed and the room fell into shadow. Justice isn't loud, it's patient. And Sarah Kendrick had 3 months to heal, plan, and prepare. 3 months before Bishop learned what every bully, every skeptic, every person who underestimated the quiet soldier eventually learned. The ones who endure in silence don't break, they sharpen. And when they finally move, the world doesn't see them coming until it's already too late. Somewhere in Eastern Europe, a man with the codename Bishop sat in a secure office, staring at a screen showing satellite imagery of Fort Bragg. He knew his network was compromised. He knew Crawford had failed. and he knew that the operator who'd taken them down was now aware of his existence. He leaned back in his chair, confident in his preparations, his resources, his years of experience staying ahead of people just like her. He had no idea that the woman he was tracking had spent her entire career becoming invisible, that she'd turned pain into strategy and endurance into art. That while he watched screens and moved pieces on a board, she was already 3 steps ahead, planning not for the confrontation he expected, but for the one he couldn't see coming. The hunt was on, and for the first time in years, Bishop was the prey. But that story, the story of what happened when patience met preparation and justice came for the architect of betrayal, that was a story for another day. For now, Sarah Kendrick walked across the base in the fading light, her shoulder aching, her resolve absolute, and her path clear. Tonight, she would rest. Tomorrow, she would hunt. And when it was over, the world would never know her name, but Bishop would. In his final moments, when every plan failed and every escape closed, he would know exactly who had come for him. The quiet one, the underestimated one, the soldier who wore contempt like armor and turned patience into a weapon sharper than any blade. Justice was coming, and it wouldn't be loud, it would be inevitable.